Hello ladies and gentlemen, let's do this. Number 60. Itadaki Street, also known as Fortune Street over here, although this particular version didn't actually come out, also has a really long name that I'm guaranteed to screw up, but it's basically a board game with a combination of Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy characters. And that board game is fantastic. It's basically Monopoly, but with actual strategy and some actual fun behind it. You've got plenty of the things that make Monopoly great, including some of the random chance elements like the chance in the community chest cards. You've got running around the board and buying properties, but you've also got things like proper balance and things like stocks, which you can use to buy into other people's areas so that their improvements are your improvements. It makes every game really tense, with plenty of backstabbing and plenty of luck bombs just dropping out of nowhere and wiping out any particular strategy you have. And it's also got 4-player online play, which works a treat if you've got the hour plus to spare. The only real downside is that since this game is entirely in Japanese, it's a little harder to get through than most other import games on this list, but at the same time, if you're willing to put in the effort, it is a fantastic little board game. Number 59. Now hold your horses. I know that you think this is going to be in here because it's ridiculously sexy, but it's actually a really good game on top of that. Monster Monplece has this really interesting card combined with strategy game thing going on, where there are 3 lanes and you have your cards that you can send down each of these lanes. They've all got unique abilities and you basically just have to push back the opponent. It works really well in both the single player campaign, which has plenty of battles and plenty of grinding to do, and the multiplayer, which while not particularly balanced for someone who hasn't finished the campaign yet, is still great against someone who you're an even match against. It's a shame that the series didn't go much further with this concept. There is one game which I plan on talking about later, and there were the sequels to this game, but they all turned out to be rather mediocre dungeon crawlers. Not entirely sure why they went for that specifically, but hey, whatever, we'll take what we can get. And Monster Monplece is still a great time, probably the best card game we've got on the Vita. Number 58.
Target neutralized.
Well, it's the final game by Zipper Interactive, so it has to be on here at some point. So Unit 13 is about score attacking and precision more than it is about being a modern military shooter. You've got a ton of missions to do with the 6 different characters, and they all play very differently. They also get bonuses for doing specific things, so one character will get a bonus for destroying cameras, one for destroying mines, etc, etc, etc. They've also got different equipment and different stats. The entire game is very difficult actually, and you need to put in a lot of effort in order to score well, in order to get the high value targets, who are basically boss missions. Hell, this used to be the best reason to use Nier, because you could actually get the high value targets without having to rely on actually getting it yourself, which is what I did admittedly. You could play the missions single player, and you could also play them co-op, but unfortunately we don't know how long that's going to last for. With that said though, if you're looking for a high speed, high action score attack shooter, you really can't do better than this one. Number 57. Rabi-Ribi combines two relatively uncommon bedfellows, Metroidvania and Bullet Hell, and it gets ridiculously difficult later on, despite the fact that it looks so adorable. It is the cutest thing there is on the Vita, except for all the other cutest things there are on the Vita. But honestly, it's just a pleasure to play through and listen to these silly characters be silly with each other sometimes. But yeah, there's plenty of upgrades, there's plenty of puzzles, and there's plenty of bosses to figure out. Plenty of really, really hard bosses, do not get me wrong. This game is a bit of a trip, but it's also got some really customizable difficulty settings as well, which I really appreciate. It's just a really well-rounded, really polished combination of Bullet Hell and Metroidvania, and if that sounds appealing to you, please go get this game. It'll be well worth your time. Number 56.
Forge your own path. Life and death hang in the balance as the horrible night rages on. Bloodstained, Curse of the Moon.
So the people behind Bloodstained ended up taking a swing at the whole Shovel Knight and Curse Castilla EX idea of resurrecting the retro platformer, and well, it turned out better than at least one of those. Bloodstained Curse of the Moon has individual characters, it has a fair few levels, and the graphic style is just spot on to the old 8-bit platforms. Not to mention the difficulty is actually relatively fair in comparison to, say, Castlevania, which is more than happy to knock you flat on your ass off a pit as soon as you touch an enemy. It's a really enjoyable throwback to what these games used to do, and as I said, there's only one other game that really beats it out on this list. If you consider that a spoiler, I'm sorry, but it remains to be said that it's still one of the best retro throwback games on Vita, and well worth picking up if you're up for a bit of hardcore platformer action. It's a shame that we never got Ritual of the Night at the end of the day, but hey, this is a good consolation prize. Number 55. Geometry Wars 3 feels like it was meant for the Vita, even though it didn't even remotely start here. The port itself is absolutely fantastic. It controls under your fingers like it never was meant to be on any platform that wasn't the Vita in the first place. The graphical effects and the sound both look and sound amazing. It's super smooth, 60 frames a second, doesn't skip a beat, and it just... oh man, the sound is just so nice on the eardrums as well. There's an absolute ton of content. There's something like 100 levels, plenty of endless score attack modes, a bunch of stuff to upgrade, and even more on top of that. And it's all incredibly, incredibly cheap, and not to mention that the game is so small that it can even fit on 4GB memory cards without causing any problems. Absolutely a must-have for those of you who are looking for something to pick up and play for 5 minutes on the regular. Number 54. Yeah, it's Dynasty Warriors with big boob ninjas, but that is not a bad thing in the slightest. Senran Kagura is basically just a button masher, but it's really well produced. It looks really good, it runs really well on the Vita, and it has some fun, light, bubbly story segments, plenty of individual missions to do, and all of the characters are just really enjoyable in their own right, even if some of them are kind of stereotypical. Although my favorite character definitely has to be the one who lives for nothing but other girls' chests. Who doesn't live for other girls' chests? But nevertheless, This game is a lot of fun, and all of its sequels just kind of lose the plot in some way. Estival Versus just doesn't run as well. Then you've got Senran Kagura Bon Appetit, which is basically just a rhythm game, but I didn't really enjoy that one. Still, this game is probably my favorite out of all the Senran Kagura games I've played, and if you're looking for a good introduction to the series and some big booby ninjas, well, there's nothing wrong with this one. Number 53. These two games are very similar, but they're also very different in certain ways. So the basic concept between them is about the same. You dig through areas, you gain resources, you take them back to town and sell them, and that lets you upgrade to bigger and better equipment and bigger and better resource gathering tools. Steamworld Dig 1 is a more procedural affair. You dig straight down into the ground, you get resources, you find upgrades and stuff like that. Steamworld Dig 2 is a lot more structured. It's planned out from the beginning and has a little bit more linearity to it, but at the same time they're both still really enjoyable examples of Metroidvanias with a unique concept, i.e. the digging. So if you're looking for something that does something along those lines, or you just want to dig down into the ground for a few hours, well, here you go. You can't do much worse than this. Number 52.
学園都市に異変とある魔術のバーチャロン参戦するのはいつもの顔ぶれバーチャロン大流行の陰にうごめく謎の思惑科学と魔術そして電脳世界が交差するとき蒲地一馬が新たなドラマを紡ぎ出すとある魔術のバーチャロン
No one ever expected Virtualon to come back this way as a crossover with the anime slash manga A Certain Magical Index, but hey, there you go. So it is more or less just Virtualon. It plays almost the same as it, it just has this weird theme going on in the background that also feeds into the story. But the combat itself is untouched. It's relatively slowly paced in comparison to, say, Gundam Extreme Versus, but it's still got plenty of tactical depth and strategy going on, especially with all the different robots playing very, very differently. There's not too much in the way of bonus content, but when the combat is this deep, it's going to take you a couple of years to beat even the most basic of Japanese players. Not to mention the story's entirely in Japanese, so if you don't know that language, you're not going to be able to work your way around this very well, but it's one of the most tactically in-depth fighting games available on the Vita, and if that's what you're looking for, you should stop right here. And finally today, number 51. Deadbolt is basically what would happen if you took the Hotline Miami concept and made it into a side-on platformer instead of a top-down shooter. It's still definitely got the shooting side of things though. There's plenty of different weapons, plenty of different enemies to take out, and there's multiple different ways to do any one mission. You can go Silent Assassin, you can go one-man army, or you can just go something in between if you feel like it. It's got plenty of variety, and it always has that one-hit kill skin of your teeth thing going on that makes these games inherently satisfying to play. As an example of those one-hit kill action games that Hotline Miami has seemed to popularize, I would very happily put Deadbolt as the second place on the podium for this one, and it comes highly recommended if you can handle the speed. Well, we've hit the halfway mark. I wonder when the rest of these videos are going to be out. I still haven't decided on a proper schedule yet, but I'm hoping I'll get there in the end. So, today I want to talk about 3 unusual cases of games especially in Japan, because there are a few games in Japan that I haven't talked about that I would like to talk about at some point, but I'm not sure if I'll ever get around to them for one obvious reason or another. With that said, I want to start talking about the first one. Did you know there was a semi-sequel to Monster Monplece that was a crossover between a bunch of Idea Factory intellectual properties? Indeed there was. It was called Nep-Nep Connect Chaos Chanpuru, and it worked more or less on the same rules. So it was basically the same card game, just without the fancy 3D models that you saw on the gameplay back there. And well, actually, to be perfectly honest, I can't tell you exactly how well it played, because I never actually got to play it. By the time I got around to actually trying it out, it had shut down, because it shut down within literally a year of starting up. I'm not even kidding. That game went down so quickly that I didn't even see it start. It's a little bit unfortunate, actually, because there was actually a fair few, like, story events between all of the characters in the game, including characters from Neptunia, obviously. But you had a few characters from, say, Genkai Toki, you had a character from Omega Quintet, another one from Trillion God of Destruction, another one from Fairy Fencer F. There were just a few individual game series chucked in there. And as far as I'm aware, the only way those story events actually survive is on videos on YouTube. And there's not that much gameplay of the actual card game because it was free to play. Because of course it was. Which means it was probably a massive pain in the ass to get all that footage in the first place. Really disappointed that it went down. I'm surprised they didn't turn it into like a single player game of some kind and then sell it again. But, well, that's just what happens, I suppose. The second game I'd like to talk about, because Football Manager Classic 2014 or Football Manager Touch 2014 or whatever it was called, didn't make it onto this list. But as it turns out, there's actually a Japanese alternative to it, published by Sega. I don't know what the exact name of the game is, but I think it's shortened to Sakatsuku. I don't know if I pronounced that properly. But it's got all the same basic stuff that you've got. You've got your Japanese soccer leagues, you've got the ability to buy and sell players, manage your team, actually send them out into the field and give them orders, you know, all the basic stuff that you've got in your general Football Manager style games. And again, it's kind of ridiculous. I have never had the opportunity to go and get this because I don't think it's available in some of the usual places. I've been meaning to try and get like an import copy, but it seems like it's just really hard to track down. Thankfully, this one isn't a free-to-play title, but I just thought it was worth noting that this game exists because it's bloody neat, and considering that it's probably really heavily reliant on Japanese, I'm never going to get around to talking about this one either. And speaking about games that are pretty heavily reliant on Japanese, there was a series of strategy games, in fact there still is a series of strategy games, called Nobunaga's Ambition. And while Sphere of Influence has come out on the Vita but not in English, there was also another entry in the series that came out on Vita, and it's actually a remake of one of the older ones that originally came out on the original PlayStation and Sega Saturn, of all things. The full name of this remaster is Nobunaga's Ambition Tenshoki, and it actually looks really good for a remaster of this game this old. They redid the entire thing. I've been meaning to pick it up and take a look at it as well, but as I said before, it's really heavily based in Japanese, and I had enough trouble trying to get through Sphere of Influence without having to deal with that. So yeah, that might never actually happen, but I hope you had a little bit of fun looking at these 3 games that I will probably never be able to get around to doing. This has been BlueMaxima. I'll see you all next time.